Hi, I'm Marc, and on this channel I talk about Brexit and UK politics. Great Britain will now lift the cap on bankers' bonus payments, which dates back to EU times. Finance Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt's Treasury announced this decision on Tuesday. The move is intended to make the City of London's financial centre more attractive after Brexit. British financial institutions can then decide for themselves how to divide the remuneration with a fixed salary plus bonuses. In 2014, after long negotiations in the wake of the financial crisis, the EU introduced the rule that bonus payments for bank employees may not exceed the amount of one annual salary and, with a special approval of shareholders, twice the fixed salary. During the short government of Prime Minister Liz Truss, her finance minister made the move to abolish the bonus cap. British financial regulators have backed the proposal. The government agency PRA spoke of undesirable side effects of the bonus rule. An unintended consequence is that fixed salaries increased, which burdens the bank with higher fixed cost blocks. The Labour opposition criticised the lifting of the bonus cap, though. Britain has indeed been deeply divided since the 2016 referendum. The divides run between the parts of the country, between town and country, between rich and poor, between old and young. And there were fears that Brexit would have negative consequences for the British economy, but also for the EU, and we've seen some. The exit negotiations, which British Prime Minister Theresa May formally initiated at the end of March 2017, were supposed to be completed after 2 years at the latest. And Great Britain originally wanted to leave the EU on March 29th in 2019. But the Brexit negotiations between the EU Commission and Great Britain hardly got off the ground for months. Despite the preliminary agreement on a withdrawal agreement in November 2018, there was still a great risk that a hard Brexit would occur. That means a disorderly break in relations with the rest of Europe. Theresa May clearly lost the crucial votes on the Brexit agreement in the British Parliament on January 15th and also March 12th and 29th in 2019. And in order to gain time for additional negotiations, Brexit was postponed from March 29th to April 12th in 2019 at Theresa May's request. The British Parliament then approved the postponement of the exit date. And at the EU summit on March 21st, the 27 EU states were able to agree to postpone it until April 12th. But that was not the end of it. Since the British House of Commons again did not approve the withdrawal agreement negotiated with the EU, Great Britain had to present an alternative before April 12th, or the country would have left the EU on that day without a deal. Theresa May then asked the EU again to postpone Brexit until June 30th in 2019. The EU heads of state and government then postponed Brexit to October 31st at their meeting on April 10th. And after the resignation of Prime Minister Theresa May, the new British government under Prime Minister Boris Johnson initially prepared for a hard Brexit without an agreement with the European Union. Until then, however, Parliament had voted against leaving without an agreement. It was quite an interesting time. At the request of the British government, the EU ultimately postponed Brexit until January 31st in 2020. After the Tories' clear victory in the general election on December 12th in 2019, it was clear Brexit was coming. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson passed the second reading of the Brexit agreement he negotiated with Brussels through Parliament on December 20th in 2019 and January 9th in 2020, and was thus able to lead Great Britain out of the European Union. In a transition period after Brexit, Great Britain remained in the EU internal market and the customs union until the end of 2020 to avoid a hard cut for the economy. At the last minute, on December 24th in 2020, Brussels and London brought their trade agreement for the period after the transition phase over the finish line finally. As of January 1st in 2021, Great Britain is no longer part of the internal market and the customs union and will have to develop its own rules in many areas. like banking. Since then, companies on both sides have had to complete significantly more formalities. Although there will be no tariffs on British goods in the future as a result of the trade pact in general, British exporters to the EU now have to laboriously prove that their products were actually predominantly manufactured in their own country. For goods from the EU intended for the British market, it must be proven as well that they actually come from the EU. Evidence of compliance with EU food safety rules and compliance with product standards must also be provided. For the British service industry, access to the European internal market became significantly more difficult with the end of the Brexit transition phase on December 31st in 2020. And the issue of fishing rights was the most difficult to resolve. European fishermen initially have to give up a quarter of their catch quotas, staggered over 5.5 years. With the end of the transition phase, the free movement of people between the EU and Great Britain also ended. This means that anyone who wants to work and live in Great Britain from now on must apply for a visa regulated by a points-based system. However, there is no visa requirement for tourists for shorter trips. Throughout the agreement, both sides agreed on a conflict resolution mechanism. The central element is a joint partnership council that monitors implementation and in which disputes are discussed. From January 1st in 2021, the trade pact was initially applied provisionally. The remaining 27 EU states then agreed to the pact. The British Parliament had previously passed the agreement. The European Parliament ratified the treaty on April 28 in 2021, and after 48 years the country was no longer part of the EU internal market and the customs union. After Great Britain left the European Union, the British economy is suffering from the consequences of Brexit. As I said, Great Britain left the European Union at the end of January 2020 and has no longer been a member of the EU customs union and the internal market since January 2021. And British hopes for a high dividend from Brexit have not yet been fulfilled. The Brexit goals with which the Conservative government had promoted its exit from the EU were definitely not achieved. These include greater autonomy, less administration, less immigration, a better healthcare system, lower taxes, and better bilateral trade agreements. New trade deals like the one with Australia are tiny and worse compared to the losses in trade with the EU. Less than 2/3 of the foreign trade volume has so far been covered by post-Brexit and mostly rollover trade agreements. And a trade agreement with the USA that was promised has not yet been concluded. Brexit should bring independence, free from EU regulations, and allow the UK economy to grow. A look at the data shows that leaving the EU has hurt Great Britain. Brexit has deeply divided the country and led to one of the most turbulent political periods in recent British history, with 2 snap elections so far, 4 resignations of prime ministers with David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and numerous historic defeats for the government in Parliament. Nevertheless, none of the major parties is now questioning the EU exit itself or publicly advocating a return to the EU. Brexit led to significantly higher costs for administration, logistics, customs duties, financing and IT adjustments in 2021, while at the same time decreasing sales revenue. The healthcare sector, the transport industry, the catering industry and agriculture are also among those affected heavily by Brexit. They have been complaining for a long time that they are lacking workers from Southern and Eastern Europe due to stricter immigration rules. Households also have become poorer, investments are stagnating, and trade barriers to the largest sales market, the EU, have caused goods traffic to collapse by an estimated 10 to 15%. Since 2017, the first year after the Brexit referendum, the kingdom's importance as a trading partner for my home country Germany has been steadily declining. At that time, it was still in 5th place among the most important foreign trade partners. In 2022, Great Britain was no longer be represented in the top 10 of German trading partners even. And the value of the pound has fallen by around 10% since the EU referendum in June 2016. And this has made imports more expensive and fueled inflation. At around 6.7%, it's still very high, and it was even at a 40-year high. And with the impending recession, rising financing costs, and increase in UK corporation tax from 19 to 25% in April 23, there is no U-turn in sight. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's government says it believes the British economy has entered trouble because of COVID and runaway inflation caused by the energy price crisis and the war in Ukraine. But according to the Bank of England forecast, gross domestic product will contract steadily for 2 years from mid-22 to mid-24, even if there are some changes in the middle. But overall, it doesn't look that good. And Brexit definitely is not a benefit for anyone except a few bankers now, maybe, and their personal pockets. And if you want to know something else, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.